And so the premise of the conversation is going to be just that. What are these giant rocks that we have in front of us that we can address and attack through conversations, as well as some of the solutions that we'll cover today, to fix some of the key components of healthcare that's got a lot of Americans frustrated about the quality and the cost of healthcare in the United States? All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and get this thing kicked off. Really appreciate everyone that came in, especially those that have traveled in from out of town. I'm really, really grateful, not only for your willingness to attend this conversation ultimately, but the networking and stuff that we're going to do afterwards. For those of you that I don't know, my name is Spencer Smith, the host of the Self-Funded with Spencer podcast. I also work for Pareto Health, the largest benefits captive in the country. And so we're going to do a special episode of the podcast with a live audience where you guys get to ask questions. And so I'm a little nervous about that, but excited at the same time. And you guys probably, a lot of you I do know, but we'll catch up afterwards. We've got dinner and stuff if you guys want to join us. But Seth, why don't you introduce yourself? We'll go down the line really quick, and then I'll set the tone for what today's conversation is going to be about.
Yeah, Seth Denson. I am the head of employee benefits, life and health for our U.S.-based and international markets at Acrisure.
Trey Marinello, managing director with Houlihan Lokey. I have responsibility for payer services, and a big part of that's employer-sponsored healthcare.
Right on.
Danish Nagda. I'm the founder and CEO of Resilient Health. We provide same-day access to primary and specialty care for employers.
I'm Jonathan Lopez, the SVP of Growth for Avant Health. We're an AI native TPA, and I'm also the co-founder and CEO for Avant Vitality.
GLP-1
program.
Awesome. Well, so what is the reason why we've got you all assembled here today? One is to get a lot of really smart, influential people in one room together to talk about some of the biggest problems in healthcare. And so the premise of the conversation is going to be just that. What are these giant rocks that we have in front of us that we can address and attack through conversations, as well as some of the solutions that we'll cover today, to fix some of the key components of healthcare that's got a lot of Americans frustrated about the quality and the cost of healthcare in the United States? And so that's the big picture idea. I'm sure throughout we'll have a chance to weave in other topics that I think are going to be relevant. And we do, near the end of this, want to source questions or comments from you guys. You are all hand-selected to be here for a reason. So if you want to ask a question or you want to comment on something you heard on the panel, we'll have a microphone that's going around later. We'll be able to capture your audio. We might even capture you on camera as well. So be thinking about the stuff that you want to hear. All right, so let's state or diagnose the problem, guys. First, I'm gonna have to pick a guinea pig to have the first question, but if I were to ask you, what are the one or two things, the biggest things in healthcare today that you think need to be solved? Seth, I'm making eye contact with you, so I'm gonna pick on you.
I had to say my name first, so yeah. I got to answer the question first?
Yeah, please do.
The one to two things that big need to be solved.
So big stuff, right? And I want to make this conversation accessible, not too insurance related.
I think the number one issue that we've got to solve for, and candidly, it's the easiest to solve for, is complexity into simplicity.
Okay.
It really is that we have created over the last half century this massively complex system with various moving parts and pieces that candidly nobody understands. And that's because it's built that way. Mm-hmm. It's intentional. And if there was really something that we could do and should do, it's simplifying it.
Okay.
And just to kind of go a layer deeper on that, as you think about the primary driver of a sixth of our economy here in the U.S. that is a huge impact to the global economy. It is done so in the guise of a free market system that is anything but free. And anything but transparent. And transparency isn't just giving me information, it's helping me understand that information. What do I do with it? And so from a primary focus, and I don't think it's as hard to do, but the outcomes for those that influence the system most would not be as beneficial,
Yeah.
is to create a simplistic way in which we engage in the system, as we do with our grocery stores, buying gas, going to sports events, all of that.
Well, sure. I'm certainly going to double click on that later. But Danish, I want to go to next, and I suspect I probably assume the answer is going to be related to primary care in some form. But same question to you, kind of what are the biggest problems that you see?
So actually my answer is not the number one thing is our food is poison. We need to fix the food supply.
Yeah.
That is the number one thing that's causing chronic disease epidemic, especially a third of kids are obese. That's what we need to fix. But what we can actually fix without upsetting the powers that be. The number one thing that we can actually fix is we have currently a provider shortage problem that I think is going to become incredibly difficult, especially for young people. And this might not be something, Spencer knows that I don't hold my tongue, so
Speak for you.
the problem that's happened is that we have this boomer generation that is aging at this really rapid pace and they're living longer. So every day it used to be 10,000. By the end of this decade, it'll be 15,000 people are going to turn 65 every single day. And we don't have enough doctors to take care of them. We don't have enough providers. And we're now going to suddenly be in a position where not only do you have to wait 3 months to get access to a doctor, you're going to have to start waiting 9, 12 months because Nana needs that doctor because she's really sick, right? And so the chronic disease burden is going to get so big that we'll forget about helping people earlier in their health journey. And I think we're going to see more issues in this road faster than people think. You might even think about this today happening to your own family.
Well, I was going to ask you though, so is that shortage exclusive to primary? It's not exclusive to primary care. It's across all specialties.
It's across all specialties.
Is it especially prevalent though in one component of healthcare?
Yeah, so primary care estimates are 140,000 short by 2030. There's only 1 million doctors in general in America. We're going to be down 140,000 primary care doctors by 2030. Of note, in Q4 of 2024, 117,000 doctors quit.
Jeez.
We are in deep trouble. This is an existential problem. Hospitals are closing left and right because they can't hire doctors, and we are in deep, deep trouble.
Well, we're certainly going to diagnose a problem. We're going to talk about how do we solve that. Trey, I want to go to you. I kind of saw you listening to Danish, and I suspect with what you do, you probably have some opinions here. But let me ask you the question first. What do you think is the biggest problem from your vantage point?
Yeah, I'd say it's three. I'd say it's affordability, accessibility, and transparency. You touched on one, you touched the other. We'll talk about affordability. I think one of the charts I saw recently in this HHS, document that came out a couple days ago, talked about the GDP growing and then the cost of employer-sponsored health plans growing, and then the member portion of that employer-sponsored health plan growing, even faster than that. So I think until you can stop that cost reshuffling and pushing it on to the end user, the patient, the member, you have some problems on your hands. And then, on the ancillary side, if you, don't have the right demand-supply imbalance, or it's opaque in terms of how things are priced, that's all part of the same problem.
Yeah, it's all part of the same problem. And I think, Seth, you hit on that. It's by design, right? That opacity, if you will, the inability to see some of the things that are going on behind the scenes, some of the contracts, the way things are priced. It's very difficult to get access to that information. And if you can't find where the issue is, then how do you actually fix it? So I will come back to your statement in a minute. But Jonathan, I want to give you a chance to answer the same question. Biggest problems in healthcare from your lens?
Did you ask me last because I'm the least smartest person here?
Yeah. I keep coming back to you last, and that will be a theme throughout.
Yeah. Hey, I know where I stand. So, I think it goes back to what Danish was talking about. Hence my shirt, "Make America Healthy Again." There is that big push from that RFK Jr. kind of push of let's get healthier again, and let's look at our food source. Let's look at healthcare, and I think more of the concentration needs to be concentrated on health span instead of lifespan. So to your point of people living longer, what good is living longer if you're living a more unhealthy life? So your lifespan is surpassing your health span, and you have more more life where you're unhealthy, where you have that chronic disease, you're constantly, accessing healthcare. Yeah, that puts a burden on the system, but at the same time, it puts a burden on your family, like you talked about. And we're going through a shortage for providers as well. So, you know, getting healthier is a great way to actually tackle that, because you're going to have less people accessing the healthcare.
ClaimDoc is a medical claim auditing and member advocacy company. We provide fiduciary services to employer-sponsored benefit plans, and allowing them to create an environment where we ensure that the benefit plans are being charged in a fair and reasonable basis.
My business is basically people, and it become a real simple transition. We thought it was going to be far more complex. I've saved, we'll say, hundreds of thousands of dollars. I could not say enough about ClaimDoc.
Yeah, and one of the guys is there. I can't see Preston. It's a little dark here, but Preston was on my podcast a couple years ago, and he made a statement that resonated with me, which is exactly what you guys are saying. It's like, if we want to fix like the cost component of healthcare, we need to produce less disease. Because if you produce less disease, by extension, that less necessary care, the expense of care goes down. Until we get to a point, I think, at scale, producing less disease, chronic disease, especially in the population, we're always going to be sort of shuffling the chairs on the deck of the Titanic with the cost issue itself. And so I expect that to be a big part of this conversation. But Danish, I do want to go back to you with now, let's start, we've identified a problem from your lens, which is the shortage of physicians. What do we do about that?
So one approach is to upskill mid-level providers. So nurse practitioners, PAs, we've seen that. But then you have to ask questions about quality, because I tend to ask some hard questions. And so that's one of the questions I'll always say is, are you getting the same level of care? And the data is mixed on that.
Okay.
The second other big solution for this is actually allowing providers to be more efficient. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. When you look at the data, 2/3 of provider time goes to administrative time.
Okay.
That's a lot of time that could go towards patient care. And then the third sort of big interesting area is what happens with AI and the ability to help AI really, just so people know, I'm one of those people that doesn't believe that everyone's going to be seeing an AI doc on their phone. Largely because I'm an ear, nose, throat surgeon. And if you came to my office and I didn't look in your ear, nose, and throat, you'd be like, this guy's a quack. And so, I come from that background where you actually have to examine patients, sometimes get labs, do imaging, like actual care. If you've got the sniffles, you don't need to talk to a doctor, just take care of yourself. It's not that big of a deal. But if it's something serious, like cancer or something else, like, you're not going to get an AI chatbot to help you. So there is this huge opportunity to augment existing healthcare providers to do more with the time that they have.
Okay.
And to reduce the burden on them on things that could easily
So you empower them, you make them more efficient, but we're still going to have a limit of supply of human beings to be able to fulfill those roles. Okay, so then what's the solution to that? Do we need to do a better job of attracting people to healthcare?
I'll say something that, again, is going to get me in trouble.
Okay,
and I feel bad because my head of comms gets really mad at me.
Yeah.
But
I don't have a head of comms.
I know, but you're lucky. So I was going to say the really important thing that's going to happen is provider plus AI is going to be 10 times better than provider alone. And that provider today is an MD, but I can tell you that the day is coming when NP plus AI is going to be greater than MD.
Really?
Yeah, it's very close. We're actually like nearly there. So it's this really interesting time where we're going to see this proliferation, and it's self-inflicted wound for the medical industry. We didn't increase the number of residency spots. We were too busy trying to protect ourselves. And this issue always leads to a world where people innovate ahead of you. There's a nurse practitioner school at every block. They're going to really start proliferating them. And NP plus AI on quality outcomes is actually going to be better because we measure quality. And if you're measuring quality and NP plus AI is better than MD, then what are you just going to an MD? And I'm an MD. Spend a lot of money on that. but outcomes are what matter.
Okay. Seth, I feel like I was just reading you there. I feel like you want to comment here.
I don't disagree at all. As a matter of fact, we've invested in some the nurse practitioner business for advice and counsel in our firm. But I think another layer to that, you touched on it briefly. I don't know if people caught it, about how much money you spent to become an MD. We talk about the cost barriers to healthcare. Well, the cost barriers to doctorship, to MD, is extremely high. I mean, you're talking private, just medical school being somewhere between $350,000 and $500,000 just on a private school, 250 plus. You're coming out as a first year making $100,000 a year. And then, on top of that, I get all of the people who come in to tell me what they already have and want. I've got Google in their pocket. I now have AI. I've got massive scrutiny if I get it wrong. And by the way, if I get it wrong, you die. There is this massive pressure component in this generation. We talked about the boomer generation. This upcoming generation is saying, wait a minute, I can go do these things, make the same amount of money, not enter into all of that debt. We have to make the medical practice more attractive. You do that two ways: by elevating it once again to what it should be, while simultaneously not allowing cost to be the barrier, rather your intelligence to be. And right now, as those that are the most intelligent, who candidly we want to be doctors, are looking at the system as it sits today, are saying, you know what, I think I'll pass.
Yeah.
We need to make that attractive and capable again for them.
Well, I see that especially felt in the primary care world, because they're not going into primary care for the most part because there's a huge upside financially, right? Still nice quality of life, but it's not a plastic surgeon. So they're sort of limited on an income basis. Then all this pressure gets put down on them for running as many people through the system on a daily basis to charge as much in fee for service so they can hit a certain target, and then they do it all over again every day. And so I can imagine a primary care physician early on in their career going, whoa, reality didn't match expectations at all. And now what do I do? And so how do we get people from, I was sort of, I don't want to say hoodwinked, but I was misled to what this was going to be. And there's a big chasm between what I expected my job to be and what it actually is. And I hate it. And that causes that 100,000 people in a quarter to leave the profession, right? So what do we do about that, Danish? And actually, I want to get Trey a chance to talk, because I know it's something you probably have some feelings about here.
When I was learning about Danish's practice, his business, it's fascinating because it's hybrid. You're going to get efficiency from AI, technology, machine learning, large language models. It's all the same thing. It's moving and making things more efficient without, human touch. That's happening. Healthcare is just behind. So it'll proliferate over time. What also gives you that flywheel effect of the efficiency is by using hybrid. You're still at parity with virtual care. And so if you're able to complement in-person hybrid care, in-person care with virtual care, whether it's physical or mental. We're talking about physical care right now, ear, nose, throat. What about all the mental health that you're seeing? There's a proliferation of that. The demand is swelling. And so you have to address that too. So I think that hybrid model coupled with technology will make it more efficient. You're seeing businesses like Hippocratic AI raise a lot of money at impressive valuations, but it won't end there. You still need a physical doctor as well.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think we go all the way that direction. And I think you and I had this conversation on the episode you appeared on, is like, ultimately, what do you want from a physician? You want reassurance that they know what's going on with you, and you want reassurance that they can help you, right? And so having another human being look you in the eyes and say, I think I understand what this is, and here's what to do about it. And oh, by the way, not as worrisome as you probably thought originally, right? That human connection and the emotional side of delivering that news is incredibly helpful to a patient. And I think, Jonathan, with the point you talked about, which is, hey, what is the biggest problem? Is food, is the things that we put in our body, the lack of movement, all of those things. But that actually dovetails nicely with this conversation about primary care, because if that's the entry point for most people in the healthcare system, as much as we can invest and make it as accessible as possible to get great primary care, then we're having conversations about, are you exercising? Are you walking? What are you eating? I think those two things are one and the same. But the chasm has always been, how do I connect as an employer to get people to invest in themselves, and where does my role stop as an employer, and where does the responsibility of the individual begin? And I know that's probably a pretty complicated question to ask you, but like, how do we cross that bridge? So especially in the world that we operate in, which is employers, how do we get them feeling comfortable to have conversations with people about nutrition, or provide disease management, diet management, et cetera, to make that part of their actual health plan?
I think it's education. And I would touch on the AI piece. I had this conversation with a friend and broker the other day. Just in my daily use of AI and my memory period, why do I still know the lyrics to Baby Got Back, but I can't remember what happened last week and what I had for lunch? Well, it's because I have a limited amount of memory. So AI doesn't have that limitation, so it can recall things quicker. So to your point of combining that with an NP, there's so much unstructured data that goes on in those meetings with MDs and their patients, and the nurses and their patients as well. When you enter that into an EMR system, no one ever looks at it, but the AI has access to that. So now you aggregate that data and you can port that data with the human and have a hybrid. The best way I always describe AI is no one bats an eye when they get on an airplane and fly somewhere. There's a human touch to that and there's a computer touch to that. Well, where are the humans involved at in that situation? The important pieces, right? Taking off and landing. The rest of the whole trip is handled by a computer, handled by AI, with the human in the background.
Yeah.
So again, I think the education and communication piece comes in. I feel like that's where, that's one of the cornerstones of a TPA, is being a great educator and communicator to help them understand that and have those conversations at the basic level. And you and I have talked about this before. You and I personally are horrible consumers of healthcare. We're horrible consumers of healthcare because we don't interact with healthcare. We try to stay healthy. We talk about nutrition with each other and what we're doing for exercise and how to stay out of the doctor's office. So when we need to access healthcare, sometimes we don't know what to do. We're like, well, maybe I need to talk to my primary care. Maybe I need to talk to a concierge doctor. And we bring up concierge doctors because they have all of our information, because they spent an hour with us.
Well, to your point, I actually just hired a concierge doctor, and it's probably a really good decision. And he's proactively asking me, hey, how you doing? What's going on with this? It's actually nice to have a relationship with a doctor that it feels like gives a shit about my health.
Well, you do realize if everybody becomes a concierge doctor, then the shortage gets worse.
Shortage gets worse.
So that's the issue.
Yeah, well, yeah.
But I like what you're saying too. So, well, we've seen a lot, across different pockets of healthcare services, especially in the employer space. If it's member engagement, you're owning it yourself. If it's some version of working with data, claims administration, auto adjudication, it started with in the 90s, but you're outsourcing that to somewhere, maybe it's offshore, maybe it's nearshore, maybe it's just a lower cost with a vendor, right? But if it's a member engagement, you want to own that relationship to induce utilization, induce engagement, get the most of the service that you're offering. That's navigation 101, advocacy. If it's just working with data faster, outsource it. You don't need to own those capabilities. Being completely vertically integrated isn't all that important.
Well, and I was going to come back to Seth's point. He made a mention that the simplicity component is the most difficult part, right? We've got this really complex system, not only to engage in, but healthcare delivery is really complex. So then let's start, how do we address the problem that you pointed out is like, how do we simplify our interactions with healthcare? Maybe advocacy is a component of that, having an advocate. What do you see as like how to fix that?
Well, there is a Buckminster Fuller mindset, which says that you never really solve a problem by leaning into it. You solve it by creating another solution and make that old problem obsolete.
Yep.
And I love what you're doing around direct primary care and AI and all this. And I think that's it. So where am I going with this? You have to make the problem as small as humanly possible. Einstein said, make a problem as simple as possible, but no simpler, right? You've got to really get it down to its basic point. And it's going to happen in a small way, right? So it is how to engage the system without the structure that it is now. I do think that we start to see a movement of closed healthcare-based systems. It starts with direct primary care. It moves into direct contracting with specialists. It moves into access to hospital systems on a direct contract or cash pay basis. And it's interesting. If I talk to somebody about how their insurance card works, most people will look at me like I've got 3 eyeballs.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I have a copay.
I show them my card when I tell them what to pay.
You understand the complexity. If I ask them how their American Express card works, They know exactly how that works. They know exactly what they got for it, what they paid for it, what their interest rate is if they miss a payment on it. It all makes sense. And I'll give you a very quick synopsis. A few weeks ago, my youngest son had an upper respiratory issue. It only happens on the weekends. And we were on vacation.
Yep.
Now, I knew that there was a standalone urgent care that does become an emergency care at 9 o'clock. And guess what? It's 9:06. But my son, what matters, and it was like, we're going there. Now, when I walked in the door, of course, we immediately got carted back. Before we got back there, the nurse practitioner was saying, he's got croup. Yeah, I can tell you, he's got croup. That's what it is. Like, well, that's, I mean, I guess good to know that we have already diagnosed it. Fantastic. What do we do about it? And they immediately came in, did a swab of the nose, swab. Then the person that collects the money comes in and asks for my insurance card. I said, nah, I'm going to use cash. She said, oh, well, you don't have insurance? Not what I said, but I'm going to use cash. Now, long story short, they told me the estimated charge is about $250. I give them my Amex. We call it a day. 30 days later, I got a bill for $5,500.
Yeah.
Because they found in the system an insurance on my son and billed it.
Yeah.
And so where I'm going with that is I had the knowledge to pick up the phone and call the CFO of the hospital. And guess what I ended up with? A $250 bill. But most people wouldn't have that.
Well, and even so, that's, you know, that the use case there is like, you got to get access to the CFO. Not everybody might be as, I don't know, good at doing so as you, but like, how does a regular person fix that?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
The process itself was not difficult. I pay with cash.
Yeah.
I asked for the problem and solution. Their treatment didn't change whether or not it was a $4,000 or $5,500 bill versus the $250 bill. It was the cash component. I already know how to do that. So going back to the simplicity, it starts small. It does start with employers, currently plan sponsors, saying, we're not going to try to push against the existing issue. We're going to go start a new solution, and that way that old issue becomes obsolete. We're starting to see that. It will grow, but more people have to talk about it, understand it, and engage in it.
Yeah. Danish, I see you agreeing a lot. So yeah.
We're seeing this huge movement in these high-performance health plans. They're designed to start in a different position. So instead of saying, here's your card, you know, you have UHC or whoever you want to name here, and just go spend that. That's the card. We took care of it. We're good to go. They say, hey, we have often, for us especially, we have one solution. You go to Resilient. You have a problem, we do multi-specialty. So any problem, just go to Resilient. Resilient, then we have a full team of care coordinators that do all of those things. Working on single case agreements, trying to figure out cash pay options. If there is a high performance network, then getting them within that network, using different tools to identify the best high quality provider, COE programs. You can't expect members to do that. I will say it's really, really hard. And the example that I give is the example that inspired me to build this company. My dad, came to this country, worked his butt off. All 3 kids went to the best schools, but he was not a good consumer of healthcare. Even though actually, unlike you guys, he wasn't very healthy. And so he had sleep apnea when undiagnosed, and they ended up missing it for 20 years. He ended up with a heart attack at 53, 60, bedbound. After that, it was just a race against the clock. He was at the end of his health span, and between that health span and lifespan. And by the way, he was the top claimant on the health plan, right? We always think of the top claimant as doctors think of frequent flyers. You don't think of them as, sometimes we forget that they're human. They've got families, they've got all this. I unfortunately had to live it on the other side. And I will say that it's really, really hard to navigate. And so when you tell an employer, hey, head of HR, we're going to help you save a ton of money. It's going to be simpler, but you're going to have to tell people that it's a high-performance health plan. They don't have the network that they've always had. They have to do things differently. The only thing that they're thinking about is noise. And so you need forward-thinking consultants and brokers that can say, look, it's worth it, because once they get used to it, they'll never go back.
Well, see, that's where incentives come into me. Is human behavior follows the incentives, and you want them to execute a different behavior, you give them a better incentive. So in that situation, how do we drive people to stop and make a better decision? Their wallet. Can I waive copays? Can I make it free altogether? If you stop and do X and go down this care pathway, it'll be nothing to you because, oh, by the way, it's going to save the plan a tremendous amount of money as well. And so next year, when you go immediately to the back of your booklet and go, what are my contributions going to be this year? And they're flat or they went down because everybody was better consumers of healthcare, everyone wins in that scenario. And so I think it really comes down to better incentives. That's my opinion.
I think that's, in an ideal world, that's how it works.
Okay.
But with better consumption requires a lot more education. And I think what you're talking about is almost fraud, waste, and abuse, where it's priced in a manner that's just, it's not in line or commensurate with the actual provision of care. You knew that and you paid out of pocket. I think, what you're talking about, the advocacy, the navigation, understanding, the market's moving towards this. It's been consumerized, or it's moving towards consumerization of healthcare for a long time. Now you hear ICHRA every other sentence. Yeah. How are you going to get this education, the awareness, the navigation, when you're supposed to do everything yourself without the help of a broker, without the help of an advocate? And it seems like a great solution, but it's almost the employer kicking the can and saying, you deal with the problem, here's your stipend, go fix it.
Yeah, I would say don't get me started on ICHRA because I have opinions there. And I don't think it does anything to actually solve what drives the cost of healthcare and premiums. It's the claims itself and bad consumption. But I don't want to go down that path because I'll get frustrated.
Chronic health issues, surprise out-of-network medical bills, inflated medical and prescription drug prices. These issues cost self-insured employers hundreds of millions of dollars every year. Add to this the rising cost of care and potential for waste across the life of a claim, and it's clear that self-insured employers need innovative solutions that lower their health plan spend. At Valence, we've done just that, developed innovation that shifts the current paradigm. A complete and integrated ecosystem solution driven by data, one that manages and simplifies the complexity of medical claim costs. It is through analyzing millions of data points that we enable employers to realize and fuel cost-saving solutions. Valence experts come prepared from day one, targeting the fraction of claims that will drive the majority of health plan costs. That is how our team lives the Valence promise, engaging early and often for smarter, better, faster healthcare.
I think there's a piece that we're missing we haven't talked about yet. It's PBMs. PBMs are common to see in the news today. I feel like they're under a lot of scrutiny, both from like the average American taxpayer, but it feels like regulators and politicians have PBMs in their crosshairs as well. So I do think it's important that we address this subject. And especially, the issues around rebates and some of those things that are bad practices that drive up healthcare. But if you were to, Will and Seth, I think you're tied to this. Jonathan, I know you're gonna have opinions here, but you talk about this stuff on TV a lot. You're obviously an analyst for some news organizations. Like, what do we do, and what do you think is going to happen in the very near future from a regulatory perspective on PBMs?
I think what PBMs never saw coming was social media. And they never saw the power of influence of people that have a lot of money and don't need their money. You start to think about the complexity and the massive aspect of the healthcare complex, right? We talk about lobbyists all the time at DC and the impact that they have. And by the way, I'm not discounting the fact they still have a significant amount of impact. But what I am saying is when you have people like Mark Cuban and Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and some of these others now coming out saying, well, I don't need you. And I won't repeat what Elon says to people he doesn't need, like, you go do what you do. But instead saying, hey, we're gonna shine a light on this, and then we're gonna start to use some of our assets to solve for it. I think that then lends to the 60 Minutes expose on the PBMs and what you see now, which is you had the four major primary financiers of healthcare became very colludedly linked, whether owned by or owning PBMs that distributed the massive amounts of drugs, are now trying to find a way to distance themselves from that. And we're looking at more and more of them looking to find a way to separate from them because of the sentiment around them. And so what do I think happens? I think that we do, if there is a piece that can start to move faster, it is the pharmacy benefit manager space. And we're seeing it now. And certainly with this new administration coming in, there's a lot of attention around international sourcing, how these PBMs make their money, engagement. taboo or not, these things are all going to be talked about and done. Best in disinfectant is sunlight, and there's a lot of sunlight on this right now, and that's a good thing.
Well, I think not only is it prevalent in like kind of the lexicon, the conversations that are happening in healthcare, I think it's the most addressable and fixable for an employer today is to look at their pharmacy spend, look at who they're partnering with as a PBM, and partner with a better PBM that's getting paid differently, that's focused on lowest net cost versus rebate maximization. And I do think the relationship that you're talking about, Seth, with those big insurers owning PBMs or the other way around in the instance of CVS, Caremark, and Aetna, like, what is the relationship between those two things? Should they divest? Should we separate them? Should regulators step in and separate them? But right now, that partnership, that marriage, it looks really optically like it's disadvantaging the employer, the people that are actually paying for it, and it's enriching both of those entities instead. Don, you're nodding a lot, Danish.
Yeah, I think that's, if you want to solve that problem, make it so that payers can't own PBMs.
So just to make that not a possibility.
That should be a requirement, and I think that's, and honestly, I mean, I have strong feelings about this, but I think the vertical integration that has occurred is largely, as many of the people here know, due to ACA regulations around the 85% MLR. And I think that we have to go back and have a real conversation about setting up the wrong incentives. Because as we've been saying, seems like that is healthcare incentives driving behaviors.
Yeah.
And who does that benefit the most? The Blues, right? If you divest the big three from the carriers that own them, those payers, the Blues benefit largely.
Explain.
Maybe, yeah. So some of the coalitions like Prime, that's owned by the Blues, right? Maybe they're not in great position. But you think about Highmark or HCSC or some of these other Blues that are for-profit in certain cases, North Carolina, maybe even Guidewell, right? They're going to benefit. I just think it's a tougher exercise to induce that divestment.
Okay.
I think it's tough to unwind them. The MLR is very real. There is a lot of three-card Monty, but
Ray, I feel like you're the realist on this panel, by the way. We've got like the sort of idealistic kind of vantage points. You're the realist. Yeah, like you're real, bro. No, you are the realist that's sort of introducing like, yeah, that sounds great and we agree, but the reality of that's much harder to do in the actual real world.
The way we see it, or at least the way I see it, PBM's a big lobby, Big Pharma's a bigger lobby. They're probably the biggest lobby. And they're okay with what's happening right now. They understand the devil right? So they understand the game that's being played, that they're the middleman in certain cases. I think what they're pushing back on are these patient assistance programs. Some of the lawsuits you see with, Save on SP and J&J, or, some of these other copay maximizers that are, quote unquote, taking their share from, large pharma. I think that's tricky. International procurement's the same thing. You're sidestepping the rules and regs that are in place for a reason. It's a gray area. But I think as a fiduciary, are you not acting in the best interest of your employees and their members under ERISA if you're not trying to find if there's cost savings to make accessible care more affordable for your plan members? So do what you can.
Well, so you and I are having this conversation prior over drinks. It's like, who wants to take the position of, no, we should pay 4 times as much for the same drug because we're in the United States versus getting it from Canada, same manufacturer, shipped across the border. It's the same drug, right? In most cases, if not every case, yet we pay exponentially more for the same drug. Who wants to take the political position like, oh, no, we should pay more, and that's the right stance? I think that's a political hot button that I wouldn't want to be on the other side of that argument. It makes too much sense as a fiduciary to try to source that drug cheaper.
You saw what Biden did with insulin and some other things, right? That was great for all U.S. citizens. There's a way to make specialty drugs less expensive. Some of these rules and regs that were passed in Florida that we thought would move across borders, but they just haven't happened yet. So with the new administration, who knows? I think PBM reform that you saw with that stopgap funding bill that was about yay high, that's tough to do in 4 years. It's even tougher to start in the first 12 months. But there are measures you can take that will make a pronounced impact and leave, an indelible impression for Trump as the 47th president if he decides to go down that path.
Yep, and I think I feel like there's political will to do so. On the same subject, Jonathan, I want to come to you because I know you spend a lot of time thinking about GLP-1s, right? And how to access this medication cheaper, the appropriateness of the application of the drug versus when diet interventions or exercise interventions might make more sense. But since we're on the subject of PBMs, let's talk about GLP-1s and how do we address this problem? Because it's one of the most popular drug categories, if not the most popular in the country right now, because people want to lose weight and they want to look better. And it feels like it's a magic bullet to a degree. So how do we address the scale of this problem from a cost perspective in your mind?
Yeah, great question. So the number one strategy I've heard and seen on LinkedIn is don't cover them. I don't think that's the answer.
So employer decides not to cover them at all.
Yeah, a lot of employers have decided not to cover them at all for weight loss, and even in some instances for diabetes, because the brand names of the GLP-1s come with that high cost behind it.
Yeah.
So, for a tirzepatide Mounjaro, you're looking at $1,400 per script, which is $1,400 a month. So being able to have access to international sourcing, or in the case of the program we set up, is being able to access that GLP-1 through a compound pharmacy.
Yeah.
That have the same strict regulations around compounding that drug as, through the FDA as other, manufacturers have as well. So being able to provide that at a lower price point, for, like
but what's the argument against compounding? Who's pushing back against allowing the compounding to happen?
A lot of the pushback has been from the pharmaceutical companies, because that's eating into their profit and what they've developed. And I understand that they spent millions, sometimes billions of dollars on research and development for these drugs. But at the end of the day, GLP-1 has been around for 20 plus years.
Yeah.
So it's not a new drug. There's all these alterations of it to make the latest and greatest version of it, so you have less side effects. But at the end of the day, it's a drug that works. It's been around for a while, and now we have all these other indications that are being researched on for GLP-1s, with brain inflammation, with infertility, with sleep apnea, that just got approved through the FDA. So there's all these other applications for GLP-1s, but with specific to weight loss, I think it has to be coupled with how to be healthier from a nutrition
100%.
standpoint and how to exercise, because we want that person to lose the right amount of weight and get off of the GLP-1 and live a normal life.
Right.
No one ever wants to have to take a lifelong drug like insulin, which is usually where GLP-1s have been prescribed in, is in the diabetes area, and that leads to a lifelong drug. So we don't want that to happen in this space. We want someone to be healthier. And it's been shown through research that taking GLP-1s and building better habits through exercise and nutrition builds new neural pathways in the brain, so new habits. So you can take that and then get off of it. Now you're not injecting that drug anymore, but you have good habits from a nutrition standpoint, you have more education, and you're still exercising.
But see, I understand it as a catalyst, and I think we covered this on your episode, so I know you're going to have an opinion here too. I like it as a catalyst, right?
Yeah.
But I don't like it. It feels like, when Oprah would give out gifts on her show, and it's like, and you get a GLP-1, and you get a GLP-1. That's what it feels like is happening right now. Let's look at all the different new applications that might possibly benefit from a GLP-1. How much of that is maybe placebo? How much of that is, oh, you lost 40 pounds and now you're just generally healthier? So some of the symptoms that were inflammation related or being overweight were contributing to those symptoms. How much of those would have subsided if you just lost the weight in the first place? And so I do get scared when we sort of over-index on the one new shiny object and everybody rushes to it before we really have a good understanding of what the side effect profile might play out over time. So I want you to comment on GLP-1s, because I know you strong opinions here, maybe your third, perhaps strong opinion of the podcast.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so I think of it a little bit differently, which is don't compare GLP-1s to working out. Because if they were working out, they wouldn't need the GLP-1s. And so you want to compare it to obesity, which is what their status is today. Do you know young people are getting more cancers? Mm-hmm. Nobody wants to say why. It's because they're getting fat. That's why. They're obese. You have to say the thing so you can actually address the thing. Young people are getting cancer at a rate that has been never seen in the United States. It's because obesity skyrocketed in young people. And over the course of the last 5-10 years, I can attest as an anecdote that that is probably true. And so the data is not just some made up data set, it's real. People have gained a lot of weight. So that's one part of it. So what you need to do is, again, what you're saying, which I agree with, which is there needs to be a holistic approach towards it. But just saying, go work out, eat better, that would be a lot easier if our food wasn't poison. Right? Go to Europe for a month and you'll be like, I've eaten, and it's not because you're walking, all right? It's not, don't believe the hype. It's because their food is better. They have better regulation around food. There are kids in this town in Dallas that were getting red dye a week ago.
Yep.
That now can't get it because we know it causes cancer. And by the way, that was one of the last actions of the last administration. I wonder if they could have done it 4 years ago when we knew about this. And there were more than one, I think there were 3 to 4 states that had already made it illegal. So we're having all of these conversations now, right? And so ultimately, we have to have a real conversation around obesity. The answer is, so you were mentioning about exercise and diet. I think one of the big problems is when you put somebody on a GLP-1, they lose a lot of weight, but they lose a lot of muscle mass. And when you lose muscle mass, you're not burning calories. So as soon as you take them off of that, their base metabolic rate is so low that they just get worse than before.
Okay.
And if you look at an employer in America, 40%, 4 out of 10 people or 2 out of 5 people are candidates for a GLP-1. If that actually occurred, I don't think Pareto would do really well.
No, I don't think anybody would do really well.
I don't think anybody would do really well. And so we have this like huge existential problem where we know that we're reducing cancer, heart failure, obstructive sleep apnea. We know we're reducing rheumatoid arthritis, all of these downstream issues because obesity is the problem.
Okay.
So I think we have to have a real conversation about it.
Well,
I'm going to be the realist.
Yeah, you be the realist. So I appreciate
there
it.
you go.
From a benefits perspective, Seth, obviously in your position at Acrisure, these things you have to solve for or help employers solve for because of the cost associated with deciding to cover these and how long is that cost gonna extend. So like from a benefits perspective, like what do you think the solution is, at least in today's market, for an employer around GLP-1s?
Yeah, so a couple things. And Real Talk 2.0, right?
Okay.
So you've influenced all of us now.
We're all Debbie Downers.
If I stick a candy bar and ice cream cone in front of my kid and say you can't have it, there's going to be hell to pay.
Yeah.
Right? Whether or not I ever ultimately give it to him or not, the kid's going to go nuts. Same thing with GLP-1s. Let's be real about it, right? If I don't and the guy down the street does, they're going there.
The employee's going to leave.
The ice cream's over there. They're going where that is, right? So you've got to put the right guardrails and structure into these programs to make sure that there is a strategy around the deployment and the end date of access. Okay. And I think if employers do that, and then they start to look deeper, I love what Jonathan and the Avant team are creating in this GLP-1 program, because it's necessary, because it does offer the ability to create a substantive program around something that can help solve the obesity problem. You want real talk? People aren't going to stop eating cheeseburgers. They're just not, unless we outlaw cheeseburgers. I'm not advocating for that, by the way. But what I would love it if we had a more nutritious system and all of that. But let's be real, it's not happening tomorrow. What is real today is GLP-1s, and they can help with the right guardrails. But in the same way that an ice cream cone helps because it makes me feel good, if I did nothing but eat ice cream cones, I would feel really bad really soon. Same applies for GLP-1s. It can be constructed in a way that there are proper guardrails and adoption, but not overuse, misuse, or continued use.
Yeah, I think, so what you're establishing, just to kind of put it in sort of plain, actionable terms, is we've got a triage, if you will, on the front end. Like, who gets access to it, and what are the steps that might be required, or what criteria needs to be met in order to get it? And then on an ongoing basis, what are you supposed to do as an individual to make sure you're adherent so you get to stay on it? But eventually then the goal is to also titrate or weighing them off of it over time as well. Is that what you're describing?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
So start and end date, but if it does what it's purported to do, that's a good thing. Is that a net positive?
Well, yeah. How do you give somebody an end date? Because if they've lost the muscle mass, you end the therapy, they're going to be bigger than they were before they started.
So you're saying the rebound effect is actually more
real.
pronounced?
It's very real. And so, the way that we've approached it on our patient side is they have to lift weights because you can keep the muscle mass high, and we attempt cessation when they hit target, but it's hard.
But that's the point of those guardrails, the structure in place. You don't, again, if I just opened up the candy jar and said, kids, have fun, I'll see you in a few hours, that's going to be disastrous. But if I say, hey, you can have a piece of candy, but here's the structure around it. We're going to go out in the yard and we're going to play a little bit. We're going to do these things. There is a process, but it has to be adopted, to your point.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't wait till like benefit programs require 1 pound of protein or 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. Are you hitting your macros or not? But anyways, so guys, I think let's talk about something that I really think is important right now. And Seth, you referenced Buckminster Fuller, and I love that concept. I actually have it down in my notes. Let's construct a parallel system. Let's talk together in this panel, and I'm sure people in the audience might have an opinion here as well. But if we're going to create that alternative system that has gravitational pull that is so much better than the existing system that people go, there's no way I'm choosing that. I'm choosing this. What does that construct look like? I mean, I presume the basis is better primary care. I think that's a given, whether it's a DPC style model, a concierge, a hybrid version, but let's turn it into a fixed cost where the actual value being delivered by primary care is quantified and we're trying to hit a target. So do everything you can at the front end of healthcare. But that next step is a very hard step. What happens when, okay, please, okay.
I actually think that direct primary care is just the beginning. I think we're going to start seeing, and we're obviously involved in this. I'm betting on this with like my company, but I think that there's going to be direct primary care, and we're going to see the emergence of direct specialty care.
Okay.
Specialty care is bundled in a subscription and everything's included. We're seeing that. Brazilians doing that. Other companies will probably follow. That is going to be a really big upgrade. The other thing is we need to expect the provider that's meeting with the patient, establishing the relationship, actually that team managing the navigation, because it's really difficult for insurance companies to do it because of their low NPS and low trust.
Yeah.
And so I think that it has to come from a well-established continual relationship with the.
But you're kind of answering my question, right? Is like that referral process that then happens is like, oh, looks like you're having issues with your knee. Go down the hall and get your MRI. And when you're done with that, go down the hall over here and talk to the surgeon. You get referred into a network and you're being driven through the system. The cost goes up exponentially as a result of that. Step in between of that is like, okay, think you have an issue with your knee. You have somebody to intervene as an advocate or a care navigator at that point to walk them through the steps. And it's probably a stair step of try this first. If not, then this. And if not, then that. But we don't rush towards, an eventuality of a surgery that may or may not be indicated. And I think that middle space is where a lot of the leakage happens. And that's where we got to solve for that. So Trey, let's talk about from an investment perspective. Are you seeing an investment into care navigation, direct contracting, areas where we can solve that messy middle?
I think the most important thing that caught my attention was primary care is the original form of navigation. It always has been. It's what you build off of. Advanced primary care is just coupling specialized care or cost containment around direct primary care. And so we've seen a pronounced impact from, using the service over and over, I should say more regularly, seeing a physician who's your PCP, working first preventively, and then ultimately with, some repeat pattern to bring down costs. And then all of a sudden, as you renew with the health plan, the price goes down. It's the opposite of why wellness, it's why wellness didn't work. You have this transient customer base or member base. They're not in their chairs long enough to make an impact to see the ROI. I think with direct primary care, you build rapport with your physician. He or she refers you around the neighborhood to the specialized care you require. And then you start to see that decline or the cost curve decline. So we think that's really interesting. The most interesting thing we're seeing is, y'all kind of combining, right? The third-party administrator working with a director advanced primary care business, and then some version of a Spencer with a captive or stop-loss layer beneath to take risk for a closed-loop system. And that's been interesting for a long time. We're just starting to see something like that take shape. And so that's where the future is going.
Well, I would agree with that. And I think that's when it comes down to the problem Seth stated at the beginning is the complexity of sort of this unbundling of the healthcare or the health plan, assembling pieces and then reassembling it into something that's cohesive and coherent, and that an average member knows what to do at that point, right? But I think it's an incumbent upon employers these days to look at the contracts they have, look at the partnerships that they're engaging in, and ask themselves, as a fiduciary, ask themselves, is this entity acting on my behalf, or are they acting on their own best interests? And I think if you get to that step, that's when you start making better decisions about who your partners are going to be. And so I want to continue this exercise then, and let's go back into the pharmacy space. So I think that definitely includes an independent third-party administrator processing the claims as much as possible. We could talk about the risk side and stop loss and captives. We've diagnosed primary care as a core component of that with care navigation built on top. The pharmacy problem. I'm going to come back to the pharmacy problem. It's typically more than a third of most employers' spend. They often don't know why that's the case, and they often feel they can't do anything about it, okay? So what do we do in the PBM space? If it's not regulatory, what do we do in the vendor space to make sure we're picking the right pharmacy benefit manager? I'll go to Seth, and I'm going to come to Jonathan again.
Well, the devil's always in the details, especially when it comes to the pharmacy benefit manager space. I think I'll go back to something Trey said, and I think he's right, that we're starting to see this closed loop system, and that's good. The other piece I'll say too, let's be real, the government's not solving this for us.
Yep.
Anytime you hear the government solving a problem, get ready. There's a bigger problem coming.
Yeah.
Right. And so what we have to do is realize that it is incumbent upon all of us to really ask the better questions, engage at a higher level, understand the components. So it starts with data, and this is the beauty of AI, right? AI is going to help us become more efficient, proficient, expedient, and accurate. We were talking this morning about a big AI endeavor that's being started here in Texas amongst a lot of the large AI-based companies coming in together. And why is this beneficial for America? Well, it's better because it's estimated the government wastes up to nearly $1 trillion a year of our spend. And since we're in a true $1 trillion deficit, getting $1 trillion of that back through the ability to be more proficient and efficient would be a good thing. But as it relates to the PBM space, I think it can work in the same way. I think AI is going to play a big role in how we assess the true. I always say this as a broker. You give me any pharmacy benefit manager's formulary information, I'm going to find a way to poke holes in it and make it, whether it ever becomes a reality or not, you're going to save money because of this report.
Right.
And you can always get the data to serve you in the way you want it to be served up.
Right.
So what we will start to see and what needs to happen is a better understanding of the common aggregated data, and then how do we then apply that comes with better consulting, better information, better transparency, and I think AI helps in all of that.
Well, and do you think any of these lawsuits are going to be successful against the PBMs these days? I think there's a J&J lawsuit. There's a couple more that have been filed. We're all looking at the CAA and the enhanced fiduciary responsibility and going, when is the hammer going to fall here? Because employers are worried, like, what am I supposed to do? But then if nothing's being done from a punishment standpoint, they don't become enforceable, and then they don't change, right? So do you envision, Seth, any of these lawsuits being successful at all?
Not in the way that we would hope that they would
Okay.
be. No. And let me just go back to something really quick at the very beginning. If you want the government to solve something here, guess what? There's a bigger problem. You mentioned the ACA. Great example. They solved it, right? Well, what did it do? It exacerbated the problem because they solved one part of a multi-pronged problem. And so I think as we start to kind of dive in, no, these lawsuits aren't going to really move the needle. What's going to move the needle is an inherent desire for change and a different system rather than pushing back on the system as it sits today.
Yeah, that's fine, right? I think you're rather than carrot or stick, we're talking about carrot. We're talking about designing a better system that's attracting employers one by one until we reach a critical mass and it just becomes normal.
Which is motivated by the stick, by the way. The stick's already there.
Yeah.
The stick is what the check that we write every month as employers to the insurance company. That's the stick.
Yeah.
Right? So it is a matter of saying, I'm done with the sticks. Right? The carrot itself is just removing the stick.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. Well, I think the subject of ACA reform came up. I know you had some notes on that. And Trey, we were talking about whether or not ACA reform might happen. But what are the pieces of ACA? We keep bringing up the Affordable Care Act. What are the pieces that exacerbated the problem in the first place? I can think of MLR, Danish, you mentioned. What else? What else is the ACA done to help drive up the cost of healthcare?
Oh, I would say one of the pieces is subsidies.
Okay.
So the government subsidizing it. To Seth's point, what does that do? We've seen this over history. It drives up the cost of that. So what happened in higher education when the federal government started backing student loans?
Yep.
Student loan debt went up because tuition went up and administration costs went up. So same thing with the ACA, it caused that to happen. And, I like to look at holistically and, seeing, like, hey, what caused this? And like you said, when they got together, the government and all these heads of health insurance companies and said, how do we make this better? They caused a bigger problem. And what that's actually called is the Cobra effect. If you're familiar with it, when England colonized India, they had a Cobra issue. So what they did was they hired locals to go out there and capture cobras, and they paid them for it. But what happened is they got smart and they started farming cobras because they were incentivized to hunt down these cobras. And it made the problem worse.
Yeah.
So then they had an even higher population of cobras in the area and they couldn't control them. So same thing with ACA. We came to the table with a plan. We didn't get it right. We need to get back to the table to say, hey, how do we control this problem that we have? You look at any of the publicly traded health insurance companies and you look at their stock price in 2008 and you look at it today and it did this. So, we incentivize them to do that through MLR and through.
Well, you look at their operating profit coming from the pharmacy benefit management space as well at that same period of time, because MLR forced them to start focusing on pharmacy so they could be adherent to the MLR requirements. But is it a matter of reform, Trey? Do we fix it through reform? Do we get rid of the ACA? Do we have to just live with it and deal with it? What's your opinion there?
I think it's very hard to repeal the ACA. I think the subsidies are driving the business. It doesn't exist without the support from the U.S. government, and having to perennially, make certain that those subsidies are in place, sending the wrong message. The MLR is a very real issue. It was designed to be something it's not. And so with Medicaid redetermination too, pushing millions of members, it's become a bastion for the uninsured. And so you're collecting all these members that really have nowhere else to go. And whether it's a gold, silver, or bronze plan doesn't really matter. It's not, if you're backstopped by the U.S. government, it's not the population that, you'd want to take a risk on at Pareto.
Yeah.
So,
well, but I look at there's a correlation there, I think, we talk about subsidies, that's driving behavior. It's an incentive, which is driving behavior. I look at kind of the market for EVs, right? For Tesla being specifically. There were subsidies granted, or still being, I think, granted today, to drive behavior to help offset the cost of that car. And in the absence of that subsidy, would that car have been chosen by that individual? I don't know, but the subsidies themselves certainly drove some behavior there. And to me, that's the government choosing kind of winners and losers, right? The government wants a certain outcome, so they're going to drive it through tax savings or a subsidy of some sort.
Well, I like your point about don't wait for the government to tell you how it's going to end. I think look at the commercial payers, the publicly traded entities, these carriers, see who's backpedaling from the ACA, see who's no longer willing to participate in the exchange market. That's telling. Look who's insourcing the capabilities, somebody like a Kaiser. So watch the commercial providers, don't wait for legislation to dictate.
Having spent years working alongside healthcare leaders, brokers, and employers, I know how overwhelming healthcare can feel for our customers. We've all been there. Those renewal conversations that never seem to get easier. Rising pharmacy costs and medical costs, and no real transparency into where healthcare dollars are going. That's why I'm excited about Nomi Health. They're not just fixing the old system. They've rebuilt self-funded benefits from the ground up. With Nomi's network, you can offer something truly different. No copays, no deductibles, zero out-of-pocket costs when members see a provider. It's the kind of benefit that makes everyone ask, why hasn't healthcare always worked this way? Ready to bring your clients something different? Visit nomihealth.com and see how Nomi is rebuilding healthcare, one employer and one community at a time.
Well, guys, those in the audience, probably about 10 minutes or so, we'll open it up and we'll be walking around with a microphone if anybody wants to ask a question or comment on something they've heard. But there's something that I think is really near and dear to me. And we talk about education, awareness. How do we solve this problem? We talk about lack of primary care physicians or the supply of physicians in general. What this comes down to is an ineffectiveness of attracting the top talent to our industry. I mean, we do a decent job at it, but like for me, it's how do we make healthcare seem sexy and cool? How do we make insurance seem like an attractive career pathway? Pharmacy benefit management, how do I get in there and tinker and fix it? And how do I use AI to do that? And so I want to talk about this, like this war on talent that we're going through right now, but specifically as it applies to our industry, how do we get the top minds to proactively want to choose to be a part of this? So Seth, I'm making eye contact with you. I'll go to you first.
Keep making eye contact.
I think it's just because
I mean, gosh,
you're not in an awkward
it's like looking
distance.
at Prince's
Yeah,
eyes.
like,
Just you can't take your eyes off. Yeah, I think there's a couple things. I think first and foremost, you've got to understand your audience and recognize there's different components of the audience. And we're looking at this next generation that's coming up and out of school. And it's a different mindset, right? I am what they call a geriatric millennial, which means I get to pretend like I'm Gen X, but I'm kind of a millennial just based on my birthday. And don't get me wrong, I had very much parents that raised me as Gen Xer, drank from the water hose, you know, never came inside until the light came on type stuff. But what's interesting is in this world of what we see these kids coming out of school or even those going in school, you're seeing this movement. And I'll talk about those that are coming out of school and those that are about to go into it. And we have this kind of this lost generation, and I call it the COVID generation of, you know, those that went to college but then stayed at home to do it because they couldn't go to school, classes, and then that group that graduated, and their entire mindset is different on the broader economy, what they want to do with their life. Some of them, it is passion about the outcome of the value of that they provide, the relevance of their life. Some of it is, you know, those of us that got into this business originally went, that's the fastest way to a BMW and a country club membership. But it really is this desire for relevance.
Okay.
And so I think what we have to start to do to attract that talent is realize that the way that we used to do it is over. We got to get away from the fact that you got to have the 4-year degree or the MBA or any of that. It really comes back to give a damn.
Mm-hmm.
You got to attract the give a dams. Because if you do and you give them a place to fulfill that purpose, you're going to find the talent and train them up appropriately.
Yeah. Trey, go to you. Yeah.
And sorry, my mom's watching. I said damn.
Yeah. A couple times.
I know. I just said it again.
I think there's two pieces here. One is that, you know, that there's a way to press the imbalance of demand and supply for practitioners. You know, some companies bring in nurses internationally, and they're facing scrutiny that, hey, could this visa program go away? And, you know, we're going to lose X numbers of tens of thousands of nurses each year. You know, time will tell. I don't think that's what immigration reform is designed to do. The other piece is technology. You know, we talked a lot about PBM. Criticize PBMs for a lot of things. There's a lot of technologists out there that, you know, make a living out of finding innovative ways for PBMs or PBAs or PBOs or other pharmacy-oriented tech companies to sidestep regs and make a profit. I think it's interesting to watch where the market moves. But I think you take these high-cost specialties, you take these high-cost areas of employer-sponsored or frankly just healthcare services generally, and you introduce technology. Well, the people that are the forward-thinking technologists in different industries are making an impact in healthcare because healthcare is 20 years behind.
Well, I think people forget our industry needs tech. Our industry utilizes AI. There's every component of our broader economy you can see represented in this space we call healthcare, but most people just think of insurance or physicians, and that's kind of the two big buckets they think about. But it's like anything you want to do could be under the umbrella of healthcare. And I just think we need to do a little bit better job of crafting narratives and telling the story of why you should give a damn, why you should care, why it's a good place to be. Jonathan, I want to ask you about, we were wearing your Make America Healthy Again shirt. I've got one that you gave me as well. How much could that play into it, right? Because RFK is this older guy, but he's shirtless, doing bench presses and pull-ups and stuff. And we're talking about red dye 40. We're talking about the chemicals in the food. Like, could he actually do a decent job of getting young people to give a shit about healthcare?
Yeah, I think there is that effect on the youth for being healthier and like Seth said, giving a damn about something. Now they see the movement behind RFK with Make America Healthy Again, and they want to get involved with that movement. I think, you know, this generation coming into the workforce, they're looking for something to be a part of. And like you said, they're kind of forgotten because of COVID. No one looked at them and said, hey, you're going to be the next doctor. You're going to be the next IT person. Now they're sitting out there in the rain wondering where they belong at. So it's, helping that. And I think what RFK has done behind, the MAHA movement is he's gotten people interested in health again.
It's curiosity.
It's curiosity. And it's, okay, now how do I get involved with that? Well, guess what? I've owned a gym before. It was horrible. Like it's just a horrible life to lead. There's a lot of long hours, not a lot of pay. And I felt like it didn't make as much of an impact because I was impacting a handful of people.
Right.
Whereas in this industry, if you impact one group, that's probably 200, 400 people. So if you're successful, you have numerous groups that you're working with over the year. So we're talking about thousands of people. So you scale your impact through being involved in healthcare or promoting.
Well, it's great marketing, but it can't just be surface level. And I think we talk about at Pareto winning the hearts and minds. What we do is pretty complex. So first you've got to win the hearts and minds of the individual, so they'll lean in and want to hear about what you actually do. I think what this movement, at least on the surface, is winning the hearts and minds, creating curiosity, creating people that are independently doing their research and making better choices. But it has to continue, and it can't just be a nice little marketing slogan. If we actually want to see it scale, people have to commit to a better lifestyle, but they also have to be able to access better foods and have a better system in which they do that. And so I don't want it to just be this flash in the pan. Whether you like Trump or not doesn't really matter. What we're talking about is the average health of an American in the United States. And I think just getting young people inspired to care about that is a good first start. The momentum has to continue if we're going to actually see anything done. Danish, you've been a little bit quiet on this particular subject, so let's let you.
It's so interesting because when a young person asks me what they should do, I tell them to become a benefits broker. It's
pretty good advice.
It's really good advice because everybody wants to do the thing that they think is important. But
everyone wants a BMW and a country club membership.
Yeah. Well, and it's to me, the impact of being a consultant or a broker, especially for self-funded health plans, is really, really big. So when a provider or a doctor asks me, hey, I want to do the kind of stuff that you do. First of all, I tell them, do not do it. It's an awful idea to build a company. But the second thing that I say to them is, if you are ready for that, the number one thing you need to do is understand how money moves in healthcare. And I think that the more that physicians and providers understand how money moves in healthcare, the more everything will start clicking. Like, oh, that's why they made me do that. Oh, I thought they were just being assholes. And often they are, but sometimes it's for money. And so that aspect of understanding insurance. But the one thing I'll push back on with the MAHA movement and all the stuff that's happened in the last month or two, I think it actually goes and detracts people from entering insurance.
Okay.
And I think it does because insurance is about sick care, and a lot of people are very interested in health. And I think that's okay. That's okay. But I think that once we start having this conversation, I think the industry needs to evolve itself and get upstream a little bit. I think you can't just keep doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome. And unfortunately, that's kind of how things have been. People's health plans, we sometimes come into groups where their health plans haven't changed in 10 years. The world is not the same, and their health plans are not changing. And so it's one of those things where we feel strongly that the young crop of people that are coming in, we actually need people at the employer side more than anything else to be focused and to try to get their own young generation in. If we can get the employers to start evolving, this industry will evolve crazy fast.
Yeah, I love it. Well, and I think even when you're talking about, you don't want to make them avoid the insurance kind of sector, but insurance has been somewhat bastardized in what's it designed to do? It's to replace a small known loss premium in exchange for a large unexpected loss in the future. It's not to hand your doctor your Blue Cross card and pay your $5 copay at the primary care physician. Those types of routine, daily, ordinary transactions are supposed to be cash-based in some form or another. But when you insure everything under the sun, premiums go up because everybody says, oh, I got to cover this now, and I got to cover this, and all of a sudden it's not insurance, it's just a payment card. It's a credit card that the employer ultimately has to pay the bill for the most part. And so I think it's actually a good thing if you get young people healthy and inspired to not have to go into the system. And then for the people that do, we have insurance there to do what it's designed to do originally. Okay, so anybody, we're going to open it up. I think Nathaniel's going to go around with a microphone. Well, all right, I was worried no hands would be raised, but let's go to Dr. Scott Conard over here first, since he's the closest. So Scott, appreciate you. Why don't you say who you are real quick and then tell us if you have a question or a comment.
Scott Conard, co-founder of Converging Health. We have Vision Hawk Analytics, which really tries to do so much of what you talked about tonight. Great conversation. Thank you. So I would just like to ask you if there's one thing that you could say to the HR staff, do this tomorrow to change what the average person on your healthcare plan actually experiences. Because I ask myself all these brilliant ideas and all these great strategies, but if the person who's using the insurance can't use it, it doesn't work. So what's the one thing? And by the way, in the HR staff, they don't have necessarily C-suite support on everything they do, and they've got to have it work. So what's the one thing that we tell the HR staff? Do this tomorrow, and I promise you're going to make a difference for every employee and their family member in your company.
This feels like, well, you got a wry smile. So let's see, why don't you answer that first? But Seth, I feel like
I would say it's pretty straightforward. Add advanced primary care. I mean, like that's very self-serving of an answer. So what I will say is build a health plan that takes into account care navigation of primary care. That seems pretty straightforward.
What about you, Seth? Yeah, sorry, I didn't want to catch you.
No, they'll never lose money on that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that, again, one thing, if there was one thing, if I had a message to give today, it would be stop looking for the solution in the same place you're looking for it now. You'll never find it. And it's you know, the definition of insanity, right? Expecting a different result by doing the same thing over and over and again. It will never happen. So if there's one thing I could tell HR, stop expecting a different result. It's never going to happen if you're doing it in the same way you're doing it today.
Yeah. Excellent. Awesome. All right. So I think we got a question in the back over here. Yeah, go ahead. Thank you, Scott.
My name is Brad Earhausen. I work with Seth at Acrisure. I have an incentives question. And Danish, I appreciate you sharing your story about your father. Like him, my dad's health span fell far short of his lifespan and passed away about 10 years ago from complications of diabetes, which is really just a way of saying complications of the food system. And I'm really happy to hear you guys talking about the food system because to me, number of claims, cost of those claims, this is a number of claims question, right? So thinking about your dad's situation, what incentives or what could have changed that outcome in your mind? And it's maybe a two-part question from both a connectivity of care where they missed sleep apnea for 20 years. Like, how does that happen? So what would have changed that piece? And then what sort of incentives might have changed his behavior to change that outcome?
Great question.
Thank you. I'm sorry about your dad. I was going to say, so when I think about my dad, it was pretty straightforward. You know, my dad didn't speak English really well, worked really, really hard, took every extra shift just so his kid could get golf lessons because that's what rich people do. And like that kind of family, you know, and didn't help that much. But, you know, when I think about my dad, it's actually pretty straightforward. He needed more time because that provider was sitting like this. We've all been there, like this on the computer while dad was speaking because of meaningful use. We're not going to go into that. Another ACA gem. But they added EMRs and it made things not better. But he literally didn't get enough time because there was another patient waiting because the fee-for-service system incentivizes more visits. And because my dad was skinny, he didn't drink, he didn't smoke, he never did drugs, Muhammad was fine. It was okay. And, you know, and my dad, he knew a few words. So they would say, hey, Muhammad, how you doing? Be like, good, because that was one of the words he knew, right? And so, one, I think we need to take care of people as humans, give them the time that they need. Continuity of care is critical. The number one cause of death in America is, does anybody know? And what's the number two? And number three? The US healthcare system is number three. Medical errors. Think about that. So the reason why it's happening is because the incentives are not built correctly. And so the reason why I built this company after building my last one, after the last one, I didn't want to do anything again, especially not a startup. And the reason why I did it is because it comes down to getting time with the same provider time after time after time. Because if that person knew my dad and actually got to know my mom, she would realize that my mom kicked my dad out of the room every night because he snored really loud. But you would never know that if you have 5 minutes, right? These are like we used to have real relationships with patients. And by the way, that's not just good for the patient, it's good for the provider. We miss that. That's why providers are quitting. There's a moral injury that's occurring that providers are sitting here saying to themselves, what am I doing with my life? Am I just making my health system more money? Am I just making the insurance company more money? And I think that that's what would change. So that's the answer.
Thank you. Great answer.
Pareto Health is the largest benefits captive in the United States. With nearly 3,000 captive members, 1.3 billion of stop-loss premium in force, and almost 1 million covered lives, no other benefits captive comes close to Pareto Health's scale. But it's not just about the numbers. Pareto Health is a mission-driven organization, and that mission has two distinct parts. Number one, to make self-insurance simple and more accessible for small to mid-sized employers. And number two, to arm them with the most powerful cost management tools on the market. So if you're an employer frustrated with your healthcare outcomes, or you're a benefits consultant looking for an alternative to the status quo, it's time to consider Pareto Health. Pareto Health, where employers come to do self-insurance right, to do it easily, and to do it at scale.
Kyle, are you in the back over here?
Yeah, so Kyle Minnick, Summit Financial Group, we're a mid-market brokerage, but I want to go back to the very first question that was asked in this, which is what is the, in your opinions, the one or two things that are creating the most issue? And I kind of want to push back against what's said, because each of your answers actually kind of flirted with what I think the real answer is, which is that the average American, especially in today's marketplace, and the average politician, does not fundamentally create a delineation between health insurance and health care, right? So, which is part of the reason why we have allowed, in my estimation, the health insurance companies to continue to make more and more inroads into the actual healthcare delivery process. In your opinions, how do you solve that? How do you separate those or create the delineation again? Because in direct primary care, advanced primary care, they do that and they advocate for that. But how do you do that in the broader marketplace?
Well, I say one, Kyle, I think it's a great question. I think something you're doing, in the future is education, educating people about the distinction between those two. And it's the reason why this podcast exists, is to make hopefully these types of conversations more accessible and more normal for people to have. But you're right, politicians especially sort of obfuscate or mix up healthcare and health insurance all the time, and they don't even really know what they're talking about. And then people start to conflate and confuse the two. And I think it's what I said not too long ago is I think healthcare is my insurance card, and that's how I pay for healthcare. And so until you disentangle the way that I pay and interface with healthcare, I'm always going to think health insurance. So I think you need to separate those two things. At least that's my answer to your question. Anybody else want to respond to that?
I think it's a fallback. You're seeing a lot of these more ordinary services contained within your health plan. It's employer sponsored. It's a perk, right? It's a benefit. For the catastrophic things that could happen, I agree. That's where the insurance should come in. But I think when you start to build around and, different brokers are better than this than others, you guys stand apart from some people that don't know what they're talking about and they confuse their clients. I think as long as you surround yourself with advocates that know what they're talking about, whether it's the TPA or their point solutions or, it's a cost containment platform, you're educating the member, you're educating the plan sponsor. I think they'll be able to distinguish and delineate better than, an investment banker, or better than, a lot of industry participants that aren't accustomed to doing it on a daily basis.
Yeah, I've often said, the day we started calling United Health Group United Healthcare, we had a problem, right? And that's nothing against some amazing people at UHC. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that we abdicated the authority of my care to the people who are responsible for receiving the true payment for it and then reallocating it. Many of you have heard me say the largest legal Ponzi in the United States, right? is the U.S. Health insurance system. But the reality is, and I love hearing that you're talking about this and advocating for it, because oftentimes I think we look at macro level problems need macro level solutions. They don't. They'll never get there. Macro level problems are only solved by micro level solutions. And every time you educate, every time you talk about it, every time you call it out, that is a micro level solution to solve the broader macro problem.
Yeah. I also think that another big piece that, you're taking on a big topic. You mentioned United. United has the most healthcare providers in the world.
Yeah.
They're also the biggest health insurance company in the world. And so that gets back to vertical integration. Is that a good thing? Or do you need to divest pieces so that there's no commingling? So I think it's a tough problem to take head on. There's no easy answer.
I think one of the things that I think you can do, especially when you think about how young people learn and consume information, it's usually through some form of short or medium form media that attracts their attention, and then they might investigate or further research based on their interest level. But I think the repeated kind of exposure to this type of information in digestible and accessible forms can help, I would say, engineer thought, but can help engineer where focus is going. And so I think we can do a better job of using multimedia to get to those next generation of people as well. So Sid, I know you've got a question. We probably have time for maybe one or two more, but go ahead. Why don't you ask?
Awesome. Hey, everyone. Sidson, founder and CEO of Avant Health, Jonathan's teammate. Thank you, guys. So the point around care navigation is particularly interesting. I think theoretically, I agree that PCP is best positioned to play that role. What is interesting to me is if you look at these plan designs where you have direct primary care, you have PPO network, disease management solutions, et cetera, right? How do you, and in a world where we're seeing 10,000+% variation in pricing, how do I know that Jonathan, as the PCP, right, is going to send Spencer, his patient, to, Dr. Nagda, who is, like I said, 500% cheaper than Dr. Marinello, right? Like, and that doesn't even include potential point solution interventions or disease management. And I think the bias point here is really around, like, I think there's a role potentially for TPAs to play in this. Like, what does that look like within this context of like PCP-led care navigation?
So I look at it very simply as there are the care people, and then there are the money people. And the challenge that's happened is that the money people and the care people are the same people, to go back to your earlier conversation. And so I'm a simple man. I believe you should keep the care people to talk about care. And the care should be driven by partnerships with the TPAs. So when our patient comes to Resilient, and if we can't handle it with our primary care providers and our specialists, and we need to send them out maybe for a procedure, our care coordinators have plan designs available to them, that they're actually reviewing the plan design and then sending them to the right place. The provider can't know that information, but the care coordinator is an extension of the team. For us, what we've noticed is you can actually have the same care coordinator over time. You actually develop a relationship with that. And that allows there to be continuity as well.
Should that care coordinator live inside of a model as yours, or could it fit within the TPA model and be independent? Like, what do you think?
I don't have the answer.
Okay.
But for us, what we have found is not all TPAs are forward thinking. And so we haven't seen many TPAs really take that on and hyper focus on that. I think that paradigm may change, but until it does, we can't have our patients going the wrong direction, right? And again, referrals are such a big part of the cost structure of healthcare. Like, you make one wrong referral to a low quality, high cost provider, and that patient's life trajectory can change.
Yeah.
And so we feel very strongly that we are in a very unique position to do that. But yeah, I mean, if there's a forward thinking TPA that wants to take on portion of that, case management's a really great place where we do partner much closer, where the TPA can manage case management. But I think care coordination, you go to a doctor and that doctor tells you to go somewhere else after having another doctor take a look, you kind of trust your doctor to tell you where to go.
Yep. All right, guys, we probably got time for one or two more questions. Anybody else have something, comment as well? You're welcome to add to. Kyle, we'll let you go again. And if somebody else wants to finish this off, you're welcome to. We got Logan in the back after that.
First of all, thanks again for the answers there. I think you hit on a couple different things, but in the vein of not only the answer you gave to my question, but to this gentleman in front of me, you said something about, you made a comment earlier about the degree of complexity that's required for the average individual to be able to navigate that system. And then you're talking a lot about care navigation itself. How do you well, I don't even know if this is a word, decomplexify the
simplify.
Simplify might be.
Well, yeah, well,
I got you.
there you go.
I got you.
How do you simplify that
You don't tell them the complexity. You just don't tell them about the complexity. You take care of it. That's the answer. And it's not the right answer. People are going to get mad. It's not consumerism. It's not what you sold everybody on 5 years ago when you gave them a card and said, go spend the money. Guess what? They don't spend well. Patients aren't consumers.
Mentioned simplifying. That's what the Bucas did, right? They bought the they bought the providers, they bought the, backstop. They bought everything that you just mentioned. And now they're criticized as being overly vertically integrated and, acting badly. I don't think there is a simple solution. You try and do as much as you can preventively. You try and orchestrate as much as you can through your PCP. And I think there's these evolving direct primary and advanced primary care models that couple a regular visit, but also with virtual accompaniments, that allows you to do that. And if you can do things like what Resilient's doing, inviting you into specialized care and making it accessible and affordable, well, that's a winning recipe. I think it's still not available for every American, and every TPA isn't accelerating, by employing those strategies. Many are still mailing envelopes and sending faxes. So that won't change, right? This is this is not fintech.
Right. Yeah, I think let me just answer this
Yeah,
real quick.
please.
I was going to say the same thing you did. History repeats itself, right? Those that don't learn from it are doomed to do it. If you actually look at the history of Kaiser, I actually started with the greatest of intentions, right? And had a good model. Said, you know what? I'm tired of all these different moving parts. We're going to simplify this and make it easy. But they had misaligned incentives for the reason you said. The one writing the check was now responsible for the care. And if it was easy, we'd have figured this thing out a long time ago. It is hard. It is complex, which is why it's necessary for us to have these conversations and people like you in the business who say there's a better way of doing this, and we're going to keep working at it until we do. The reality is you've got to make sure at its core, the incentives of those separative parts are aligned for the common objective, right? Meaning, you get paid for the work that you do, which is aligned with the same objective of the work that you do, and you do, and you do. And now we're all in alignment, and we keep those guardrails and that separation of objectives, of workload in place. And that's what will help us ultimately start to get to where we need to go.
Thanks, guys. Glad to be the last one here. Great panel. Appreciate it, Logan Berry and with Acrisure. We've talked a lot about the healthcare system today, insurance. I want to kind of encourage everybody to take a step back. One thing that hasn't been mentioned, social determinants of health, right? Access to healthy foods, access to better menus at daycare, at schools that are creating unhealthy children, that are causing them to get chronic diseases or cancer early on. Not necessarily looking for an answer, but looking for opinions. We talk about changing the conversation. How do we as consultants and brokers change the conversations with our clients for them to start thinking about what are some resources that I could offer to my employees who maybe don't have the financial stability to go and buy healthier foods, right? Or they're using a government assisted card to go buy foods that we know are the poison foods already, right? Or sending their kid to a daycare that can't pack a brown sack lunch because they can't afford those foods. Are there things that you guys can think about or ways that we can change the conversation to stop them from getting in the system altogether?
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, we could contextualize the cost of GLP-1s. You mentioned $1,200 to $1,400 a month. Would it be crazy for an employer to help subsidize purchase of healthy food to the tune of $1,200 or $1,400 a month? I mean, I don't know how crazy that would be, but let's contextualize that. Like, let's put the scope of the problem. Is that inside the realm of possibility? I don't know, but this is where I get, there's a giant canyon between what the employer thinks they're allowed to do and what the employees will accept. And until we get down to that level, I don't know if the employer effectuates that all that much. But anyone to comment or answer that question from Logan? I think everybody does.
I'll answer it, even though it's kind of a homer answer because Logan and I work together. So we get to have these conversations quite often. I think it starts with the fundamental thing that we talked about earlier, which is you stop trying to find the solution in the same place that you are looking. I say this oftentimes to my leadership team at Acrisure, and we talk about it often to our clients. Employees will leave you for the same reason they're staying with you.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is we also, well, why do you provide benefits? Well, to attract and retain talent. What does that mean? Well, lower deductibles and a Buka card that they can go anywhere they want, whenever they want, and all this other good stuff, right? And yet what? They're still leaving, right? Because we haven't created something different. So to the point you just made, I think you're bringing up, we have to start thinking about our unique population as a unique population and developing what truly is a benefit, not an entitlement program around the needs of our population. And I will tell you, a great place to start is ask them.
Yeah.
We don't ask them the right questions. We ask them about their deductibles and do they like them? And the answer is no. And is their paycheck good? No, right? We have to get to the heart of deeper questions and recognize it's okay for us to do that. There's no HIPAA violation there to do it. And then we can start to really think about constructing a benefit program truly to benefit the employees that we serve.
I think it's about incentive. It's no different than smoking cessation in the 80s or 90s. You know, if you're going to offset premiums because people elect to stop smoking and your rates go down as a result, you know, that's one way to tackle it, by affording people access to better care or better financial advisory to prepare for, you know, your longer term success, or if it's subsidizing food. What's the incentive? You know, how are you going to pay back the plan? It shouldn't be a handout. It should be a let's work together and collaborate for the mutual benefit of the health plan. So we're seeing companies, what fixes this quickly is innovation. You're seeing an awful lot of social determinants of SDOH innovation in seniors, right? It's attached to Medicare or Medicaid. You're seeing less of it in employer-sponsored or commercial, but it's just a matter of time before people find a gap and they recognize how they can fill it with technology or with, you know, incentive alignment.
Any commentary, Jonathan?
Social determinants of health, you know, for folks that are new to the space, we know 80% of clinical outcomes are actually determined by your social determinants, not clinical determinants. And I think that, again, we see it every day, right? You're talking to patients about smoking, you're talking to them about diet, and you can talk to them until they're blue in the face, but ultimately they'll say, well, I'm working 3 jobs and I got to make something quick. So either my kid eats or they don't eat, and I got to make something quick because I have to rush to the next one. And growing up in a home like that, I get it. Obviously, we have to have a national conversation about what is happening because it's a regressive tax on the poor, right? Poor people are affected by bad food more than rich people are. And so that there is this regression towards it. And I think all Americans can get behind that we shouldn't be making poorer people sicker. But I think on what we can do, you know, what employers can do, we have seen some really interesting strategies. The number one interesting strategy that we have seen is encouraging gym memberships plus food memberships to co-ops. If you ever seen the co-op food memberships, it's actually a membership model that can allow employers to not have to worry about, I'm going to give you a card that you're going to spend for food. Instead, you say, hey, you go to a farmer's market once a month, or they can deliver it to your home. We will cover that monthly cost. And we've seen that be, I mean, when I say, and I hate to say this in some ways, but it's a better ROI than any primary care doctor can ever deliver.
And by the way, employees won't want to leave that to go to your competitor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. It's that change of mindset.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, I think we're going to finish it up here. I want to get closing thoughts from each one of you, just a closing statement or the discussion today, if you want to summarize that. And I'll finish last and just talk about how we made this episode possible today. But Jonathan, I'll start with you and we'll go down the line here. What's a 1 or 2 things that you want to leave not only the people here with, but the folks listening at home as well?
Yeah, I think, like Seth said, you can't look in the same place that you've been looking for the solution. And I think it's kind of a tiered system. Like do you remember looking at a microscope when in elementary school, and you click it over one time, it goes a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper. So I think we need to look at our clients and the issues in the same way, from what does the overall demographic look like and how can we help that demographic get healthier? What do they need? And then what does a cohort need as well? So, my diabetics, my high blood pressure, all the chronic diseases, what do they need as well? And then at the very end, what does that individual member need? And how do we help them? Like I said earlier with both of us, we don't access the healthcare system very much. Our interactions usually with the PCP, and that's about it.
Yeah.
But that's what we need. So do our employers, and obviously I think of this from a TPA perspective, do our clients who are employers need to pay a PEPM for a diabetes program when maybe 10% of the population has diabetes, when they want to pay for all these disease management and care management programs? It becomes overwhelming and you PEPM them to death.
Yeah.
And it's just like, now I'm paying what, $75 PEPM, $100 PEPM.
With no tangible ROI.
With no tangible ROI. So concentrating down to that level, and that's what we're trying to build at Avant, is how do we look at those different levels and ultimately get the member the need that they want and need from their own health aspect.
Awesome. What about you, Danish?
I think, we've talked a lot about what's happening in insurance. I actually want to change my closing thought about what's happening in the world right now. We have a new administration that's joining. There's a lot of talk about making America healthy again. That's kind of where we started. I think physicians have tremendous moral injury and they're changing their mindset. They don't want to work in the system. They don't want to be a cog in the wheel right now. And something really big is happening alongside that. We have GLP-1s that are upstream. We have AI that is progressing at a very rapid pace. We're sitting here today while the government just announced a $500 billion AI project called Project Stargate. We are living in a very interesting time. And if you're an employer that wants to do the same health plan you did 10 years ago, I think people are going to leave. I think people are going to start saying, or, unfortunately, you're not doing your fiduciary responsibility.
Right.
I think that's the thing which is changing, which is you can't sit here in the moment in time that we're in with how difficult it has been with the pandemic and after the pandemic to say that we're going to keep doing the same thing. And the answer isn't adding more point solutions.
Fair enough. What about you, Trey?
I like the last part, fewer point solutions, more consolidation. I think we're helping businesses come together to be a more comprehensive offering so that there's less complexity in the system. Simplicity is probably too far afield right now. There's still a lot to do, but I think as you couple administrative technology with, engagement-based services, advocacy, whether it's from the brokerage side or it's a true navigator, primary care physician, and then you pair that with clinical, you really have something, and it's differentiated. And it's not as much for, these types of solutions have been for the larger end of the, self-insured market, which is that's what's going to save the world from, the opacity of the fully insured plans, right? But it's for the lower middle market, these 50, 100, 250 life, employers that just don't have the buying power to set price. Those services weren't designed for those types of cases. So I think moving into the lower middle market with these comprehensive solutions that were designed for larger plans, that's where the market's going, and we're looking to be a part of that.
I think benefits captives might solve a little bit of that for the small to mid market. But you said simplicity. I think Kyle's word was decomplexify. Was that what it was? Okay. Seth. Seth, your closing thoughts, and then I'll finish this up.
Yeah, two quick things. One, I think, is this: innovation is hard. That's why it's innovation. I mean, it's something new. It's something different. It's hard. You've got to stick with it. You've got to be persistent at it. And there is hardly a blueprint for it. And so tying that in, the true solution is found in all stakeholders of the healthcare system, whether that is the patient, the provider, the payer, or even the employer, in better questions.
Mm-hmm.
The intentionality of better questions will ultimately lead you to a better solution. And we've got to get to a place where, as brokers, providers, patients, and employers, we're asking better questions. And it oftentimes starts with the simplest question: why.
Awesome. So I'll close this out, guys, and I just want to close out with sort of an expression of gratitude, especially to the panel. Those of you that traveled in, even more so, I really appreciate you guys doing that. And then just thanks to you guys. I mean, this is crazy for me to think of the very first podcast I shot in a little co-working space in Frisco with Nathaniel, as a matter of fact, and then to do something like this that I felt we did an okay job at with a lot of moving parts. And so I want to say thank you guys for being a part of that, and really looking forward to networking that's going to go on after this, and of course some dinner as well. And so thanks again, guys. I appreciate everybody. Let's go have some food.